Okay, welcome to the next episode of The Dawn of Unpopular Opinions. I'm your host, Chuck Scott. Today's guest is David Hwang. Say hi, David.
Hey.
David and I are going to discuss, well, you know what? Let's start with an introduction. David, tell the people who you are.
Buddy of Scott's, Chuck, and we played hockey for years. I didn't even remember when we first met, but was part of the hockey community family here, and played in tournaments together. Just ran in the same circles off ice as well. So, yeah.
Any other attributes about yourself that you want to tell the people? Because we're doing the audio only episode today.
Asian, grew up here in Columbus. I was born in the United States. My parents came over from Korea, and I guess that would make me second generation. I consider Columbus my home, and kind of had the Midwestern upbringing, a little bit as an outsider.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm the host, Chuck Scott. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, African American, grown up in Columbus, Ohio, my entire life. Come from a very diverse background of people in my network. My parents were very, I'll call them middle to upper middle class family. They spent most of their disposable income on education. So myself, my two siblings were all in private schools. We went to, like I said, private schools. We played a lot of what I call affluent sports like hockey. So I'm an African-American hockey player born in 1980. So during the era where there were far less points of color in the sport of hockey than there are now. But I had a very diverse situation growing up. Schools in the inner city, grew up in the inner city, but again, private education. And so I had a whole network of people who were more affluent living in the suburbs. And I saw everything top to bottom, left, right, center, you name it. So I'd love to argue unpopular opinions from all angles of American society and fabric. Today's podcast is unique in the fact that we have two minority hockey players on the podcast and talking today. So glad to see David here. What's super funny is Dave kind of touched on this. A lot of people that I've met over the years in hockey, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when we met. We knew all the same people. We played, in the same circles, similar skill sets, etc. on the ice, and, formed friendships and bonds off the ice. So here we are today, many, many moons later, having that podcast, Dave and I. So anyway, that being said, let's get into today's content. I'm going to start with a off-the-cuff question for Dave that he is not prepared to answer. I love catching people off guard a little bit. Minority hockey player, Korean minority hockey player.
Yes.
I actually got two questions for you. So let's start with the hockey one. And they're just like icebreakers here. So
okay.
Craziest hockey story from a Korean standpoint, like something unique to being Korean that you ever experienced.
Unique to being Korean?
Yes. Like something that, it could be minor, it could be major, it could be it could be like this hurt me deep. It could be anything. Just something unique to being Korean or perspective or...
Oh, let's see. A happy one would be, going to summer school in Korea, Yonsei University. Mm-hmm. And they were I didn't even know they had a hockey team there. Going to see the rink there and meeting one of the coaches who was from Boston. And I think it just kind of, because I looked like everybody there. Okay. So you would assume that I wouldn't speak English, and just calling them down to the bench and saying, "Hey, what's up? It's so awesome to see that you're here teaching a clinic." And he just was so shocked, surprised. That it was just pretty cool to see, the global reach of hockey. Probably the one that's probably not so pleasant is I remember the Olympics. I think Team China was beaten by Team USA. And our local hockey community here had a reaction to that. It was just kind of a reminder of my Asianness, Koreanness, even though it was Team China. Was somebody in our hockey community here was like, yay America. The only sticks those boys should pick up are the chopsticks.
Wow.
And yeah, that hurt.
Just insensitive comment. This is a teammate, right?
No, it was somebody that played in the, kind of maybe the 40 and over leagues or something, older hockey.
Okay.
Player. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I've had similar experiences with the hockey community, right? Like just racially insensitive things. But today we're going to focus on the Asian experience and yours and being of Korean descent. Second thing I want to kind of throw a curveball at you on is you mentioned second generation immigrants. So talk to me a little bit, or talk to the listeners a little bit about some of the things they don't know about the immigrant experience, right? Like there's a lot of stereotypes of like, and some of them are super positive, right? Like very hardworking, right. Things of that nature. Like tell the viewers or the listeners out there something that they don't know about immigrants and the mindset.
So, for at least my experience, my parents, they both came over here from Korea. My father, his typical, stereotypical, I guess, immigrant experience. He came over with, very little in his pockets, a suitcase, became a doctor, and married my mom. And so they definitely, coming from Korea at the time that they did, basically taught us that, work hard for everything that you get, put your head down, don't complain, don't rock the boat, just work hard. And, that's all there is to life. So it definitely was an interesting experience. They wanted us to fit in. So I know that this is somewhat common among second generation, is they didn't want us to have an accent. They wanted us to speak English. So it was just very much a focus on English. So I'm one of those that are not fluent in Korean.
Okay.
I'm very unfamiliar with the language. So, and that was a decision of my parents. And growing up, they thought I would fit in better here in the Midwest. So yeah.
That's interesting. So insightful for me. I've grown up with different immigrants that like families that I'm close to. And for the most part, I've seen quite the opposite, right? Like this influence from the previous generations of, I don't want you to lose our history of where we come from.
Right.
And I want you to be dual language. Like obviously you need to function in this society because it's where we live. But I also want you to speak our native language at home or in our functions and be able to travel back home and things of that nature, right? That's interesting. I mean, it makes sense, like this whole concept of fitting in.
Yeah.
Because I've heard both sides of that immigrant experience based on race and culture. Like some are like fit in, blend in, but then they're also like, okay, but the second we get out of those circles and we're back in our normal circles, let's be who we culturally identify as, right?
Yeah, for sure. They had left Korea, I think, in a tumultuous time, and Korea was, I think, in a period of rebuild. So it was like they came from, it was after the war, and the country was rebuilding, so it was not in good shape at all. And I don't think that they had ever thought about us going back to rediscover Korea. I did that on my own in college to say, like, I want to go back and see where they came from and learn the family history and all that. So
okay, so I think that's a great segue. So let's talk about some of your travels, right? Like you're a pretty well-traveled guy, so. How often do you get back to Korea? What's normally the nature of those trips? Like, walk us through that a little bit. We've never talked about that. So I'm very curious to hear about it.
It was a lot more in college to visit family and stuff, and kind of rediscover the homeland. Nowadays, because, I'm in an international marriage, married a Taiwanese lady, and, due to the fact that the vacation is what it is, and her father is a lot older and needs more help. It's just him back there. We do travel more to Taiwan than to Korea. But, I have been traveled to Korea to visit family, traveled to Taiwan a lot, visited Okinawa. It's definitely been interesting in all my journeys there. The very first time for me, it was a culture shock. I grew up, in Ohio here, majority white, and especially, me being born in 76, went to high school here in Columbus. So going back to Korea for my very first time and seeing that I was a majority, seeing everybody looked almost like me, that was such a shock. Definitely out of body experience, but a very, very interesting, kind of rediscovering that part of myself.
So explain that a little bit. Like you said, it's a shock, like positive way, negative way, just unexpected. Like what was the kind of the emotion behind it?
Overall positive, and it's nuanced, complex, because growing up here, there was a definite kind of, reminder that I was an quote unquote other, not fitting in, that I always looked different. I would never have known that, I just growing up here, looking at my friends, classmates, that I felt like I looked like everybody else, except when I was reminded I wasn't or didn't. And, part of the decisions that my family made and how they wanted me to fit in kind of bit me on the ass. Going back to Korea, at the time in the 90s when I first went back, there was, a big stigma on Koreans who didn't know the language, who they were just treated almost as outcasts. So I grew up in America. I was trying my darndest to fit in, wasn't all successful, I guess, because, I was constantly reminded that I was an outsider. And then you go to Korea, and then, it was great to rediscover that and not everybody was like that, but there was still that backlash, like, how dare you? You're Korean, you don't know Korean.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you kind of thing. But I mean, it's like the kind of, I don't know, people have called it living in the hyphen, Korean American. Don't belong to one or the other. And there's definitely pushback from both sides. So it's complex situation.
It is. And I feel like, I don't feel like that's unique to just Korean Americans.
Right.
I think that's like every hyphen American. And I think the masses of America don't really understand that. Like, that dynamic of there's your American heritage, there's your, where you descend from originally, before you were either migrated or stolen to this country, whatever it might be, whatever the situation.
Right.
And, like I've had this conversation even amongst, my peers and demographic of, I feel like there's, we're African American, but I feel like there's African culture, people that are like Africa that never left Africa or migrated here but born there.
Right.
And then there's like Black America, like there's African American culture, which basically in and of its roots is like post-transatlantic slave culture of, the history of slavery is the beginning, the genesis of that culture, and everything that's come as a result there. I feel like there's a disconnect at the Atlantic, quite frankly.
Right.
And most in my culture don't ever go back to the homeland to rediscover those roots, right? So they only identify with here,
Right.
in that experience, which is tumultuous and has its own challenges.
Right. It's different. The Korean who comes from Korea versus the Korean American, for sure. I get that. When my cousins came to America first, they were in high school, and when they first encountered racism in the Midwest, Ohio, they reacted to it very differently than I would. They had a lot of pride, a lot of how dare you, and they had a lot of fight in them and aggressively confronting it. Very different for us, living in the hyphen, growing up here. That's for sure.
Yeah, because to your point, you were preached by your parents to blend in, right? Like not keep your head down. I think you said keep your head down,
right?
Not kind of rock the boat too much.
Yeah.
So very interesting insights from a experiential standpoint.
Wow.
Okay, so going back to like traveling abroad and seeing. So when you travel, do you typically try to hit Taiwan and Korea, or is it one or the other typically when you travel?
It's typically one or the other.
Okay.
It usually takes about almost 2 days just to get over there.
Okay.
And because it's a 12-hour difference, you're not even functional the first couple of days. That's a heck of a kind of jet lag to adjust to. So, that and the fact that, the different countries, you got to go through immigration, and, the focus is on, I guess, my wife's father. He's the one that kind of needs it most at the moment. So yeah, we have whatever we can, whenever our vacation allows, go over there. And now I'm bringing my hockey equipment with me. So yeah, it's definitely a great experience to see different parts of the world, meet different people, see things from different perspectives. I definitely think that's been an eye opener for sure.
Quick question. You mentioned that wife's from Taiwan. You're from Korea. Is there any stigmas or anything, between those two countries as far as like marriage and things of that nature? I know they exist in certain cultures. I didn't know if there was any clashing where parents are like, no, don't marry someone from Korea or don't marry someone from Taiwan.
So it's more between Korea and Japan.
Okay.
Taiwan and Korea, not so much, except when you get to really traditional parents, and my parents were kind of traditional, they would have strongly preferred if, me and my siblings had married all Korean girls. We did not.
Yeah.
We all married Chinese girls.
Yeah.
But there's different, how do you call it, idiosyncrasies between the countries. Not really any hostilities between Taiwan and Korea, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it like, what are some of the, why did traditional parents push back against it? Like, I know in my culture why there's pushback from previous generations. And a lot of that I attribute to the fact that they just grew up in a different day and age in America's history. So, there's a sense of Black pride and basically they haven't been through that same struggle and experience with us. And I don't have to explain it to somebody.
That's a good point. So, I mean, my parents wanted us to marry Korean girls because they thought that, they would totally get things in the culture without having to have those talks. Part of it was, I think, that what do you call it? Majority supremacy kind of feeling, like, Korean girls are the best. That's who you want to marry, kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So, that's that traditional mindset.
Sidebar, and I can't remember what led me down this path of research, but most cultures have that same, what was the term you used? Supremacy. What was the majority supremacy? Most cultures have that majority supremacy. For some reason, I was researching something once upon a time, and I found that most cultures have that except for Black Americans. By and large, if you look at the statistics, the men in Black America tend to date other races more than their own. From a choice standpoint, they don't stay in the race. It's the only one of all the demographics in America that does this. It's weird. From a statistics standpoint, right? For the most part, people tend to, be homogenous in their mating practices and choices. So, interesting little sidebar there.
Yeah, well, I'll add to that. There's obviously there's even more nuance of that. So, my wife came from Asia.
Okay.
And I am, by any measure, more Americanized than she is. So there was even a culture clash there. You would think, Asian marriage would, and there was less of a clash, and we understood some things. There was still some aspects that I was way more Americanized than she was, and it definitely wasn't. We had to, kind of work past those differences too. So for sure, it goes back to your point about across the Atlantic, someone who lives in the hyphen versus someone from the homeland kind of thing.
No, it makes sense.
Absolutely.
What age did your wife move here?
She moved in college.
Okay. So somewhere between 18 and 22.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense because, your identity is not all the way forward, but pretty well defined at that point. So,
right. Yeah.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It just speaks to those negotiations in any marriage, right? Even if you're from the same demographic, there's still how were you raised versus how was your spouse raised? How do we now bring those together in one household? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally makes sense. Okay. So let's go back to, your travels. You said you like to bring your hockey equipment with you.
Yeah.
Has there always been hockey to be played over in Asia? Or is that newer development?
There has been.
Okay.
And I'll go with, Korea first. Because when I was there in the mid-90s, there were rakes. Some of the universities actually had hockey teams. And, more recently, Korea wanted to, because they hosted the Olympics, they wanted to kind of make a good showing in the top division, which didn't go too well. But, they were kind of catching on. Just went over a couple times where I was kind of like, boy, I wish I brought my equipment. Just in the last several years, I went ahead and I did it. I was like, you know what, we're going to Taiwan. I know when I'm going, and I know there's rinks there, and, caught on with some expats, got to meet them, and, it just turned out well. So it became a habit. Like when I knew we were going to take a trip out to Okinawa, I knew, first thing I did was Google and check around for any groups, private skates, and sure enough, there was. And a lot of them, because there's the military base there, they were military that played hockey. And some of them, there were expats that moved out to Okinawa, some from Europe, some from Australia. So yeah, funny story about that. The group, when, he asked me, obviously, like, yeah, this is a private skate, but want to know your level, where you're from. I told him Columbus, Ohio, and he was like, oh, Blue Jackets, eh? He's like, we've got a military person here on rotation from Columbus, Ohio. He's like, he's going to be so happy, jazzed to see that you're there. So, I show up, get dressed, and in my socks are the Blue Jackets colors, wearing a white jersey. But, he came up to me, he's like, oh, you're from Columbus, huh? I was like, yeah, I'm the guy. He's like, yeah, it was the Blue Jackets colors that gave it away. So, yeah, it just came to be a habit. Like when I knew we were going to a place for, an extended amount of time, if I can, I'll bring my hockey equipment with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And so paint the picture here. When you go overseas to play, you bring your bag. I mean, is it 50% like folks from the base, 50% people local, or is it like, what's the split look like?
So when I went to Okinawa, it really felt closer to a 50-50.
Okay.
Where, there's the American military personnel, and the rest were, expats, or, the majority of the rest were the natives, I guess.
All right. So I know for me, I've never even gotten to a 50-50 split. I maybe have been on the ice with like 4 or 5 other black people at once. And even that's cool to me, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
like, again, what's the emotion like the first time? The first time you do that, and it's half, people from Okinawa, and you're just like, wow.
Yeah, it was cool. I like you, just to be on the ice with a few other Asians here in Columbus. That's a really rare thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think at one point, like, I was the only Asian hockey player in the B League, but it was one game, I think, C League game, me, my brother, and another Asian, Justin, Sean, good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were all jazzed about being like, all Asian lines.
Right.
We were just cracking jokes. Saying, oh, this is a first here in adult league here in Columbus. But yeah, to go over there, definitely interesting. There was like a cool fact, like a wow, like, oh, I'm here, I'm playing hockey in a new. It's like some people have a bucket list, like I want to watch a movie in every continent or country or something like that. For me, it's like it's so cool to play hockey at a new place,
Right?
New friends, and yeah, like I couldn't believe I was playing hockey in Okinawa, and it was just pretty interesting. Funny story about that.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, this is kind of the past, and how there hasn't been a harmonious relationship between, the Okinawans and the Americans. There were obviously some incidents, and when I went over there, in as much, broken Japanese and English, tried to let the ice rink front desk person know, like, yeah, I'm here for the private skate, and I'm from America. It came out all wrong, and you could see that tension come to light because of injustices or tension or whatever that came out when I said, yeah, I'm American. His attitude or response was very much like, yeah, and I care because my wife was making the motion like, no, you don't want to do that. Like,
Right, like just leave the American piece.
yeah, leave the American piece behind. Yeah, that was a little bit of what do you call that? Very naive about world affairs.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, interesting experience.
Yeah. And, you mentioned like kind of noting that you were at one point, you were probably the only Asian in the Columbus adult leagues, which, shockingly is one of the larger adult leagues in the nation here in the U.S. I think to our Caucasian counterparts, I think there's an idea or concepts out there, or even just the thought of like, why is everything so noteworthy, right? Like, why is it noteworthy that you're the only Asian in the adult league? Like, you're a hockey player like everybody else, right?
Right.
And I don't think that it's hard to describe a world to someone who's never lived there. Like you said, you're always in this situation where you're the only one.
Yeah.
And so it feels good to be the only one in a, I'm gonna call it a trailblazing way, right? Like a sport like hockey, which is, predominantly white, or, whether it be something in your professional life, and you're like, hey, I'm the first of my kind to achieve this level.
Right.
There's nobody that looks like me, but it ties in with the whole like representation matters. You'll be the beacon of light for the next generation or the next person. They'll see you and say, hey, that's attainable, that's achievable.
Right.
One of the things for myself in the hockey world is, I've never been able to fact check this or not, but I'm pretty sure I'm the first person at Ohio State to play collegiate club as an African American and collegiate roller hockey club, like both teams. Because I did 4 years on the roller team and 1 year on the ice team. I don't know that there was anybody before me that was of color that did both.
Wow.
So, but again, like, how do you even fact check these things?
Yeah, and actually that brings back a long buried memory, because I think one of the very, very, very first times you and I probably played against each other was, I don't know if you remember the old roller hockey sports site.
Of course I do.
Yeah. I think that may have been one of the very first times I ever saw you play.
That would make sense. I practically lived there as a youth.
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense.
Yes, that's one of the common responses I think I see a lot from, Caucasian people. It's like, what's the big deal? Why do you have to highlight race? Why do you guys talk about somebody's race? I can't. So what goes through my head when I hear that is, those thoughts that come to me, not from like a racist kind of like, hey, I'm laughing at you guys, or, I've got this big chip on my shoulder. It's really just a humble, for me, awestruck, like, oh my gosh, I'm looking around, I'm playing in a B league. I'm the only Asian here. Mm-hmm. And at the time, that was the top league. They didn't, shut down the A league. So it was more of like take a breath, look around, and, just like, wow, I can't believe it. I'm playing here in the B league. And, that's good. Hopefully someone can come behind me and I can show that, yeah, it can be done, because typically Asians don't go, high level in ice hockey. Mm-hmm. So I never got that people would look at that and say, aha, you're racist because you're thinking about that.
Right.
And, from a genuine, honest, like I'm confused. I really don't understand that. That's really where it comes from.
Yeah.
I can only speak for myself.
So, same thing with me. Again, like I try to make myself available so that people feel comfortable having, even if it's in private settings, any type of conversation about race or whatever it might be, socioeconomic issues, etc. Because I'm a true lover of debates and looking at things from all angles. Yeah. And to your point, you're like, I'm confused while you're confused, right? It's one of those things where if you've never been in that situation, you don't know what that feels like. Right. And so to your point, and to my point, it's like all day, every day, there's just this like awareness of I'm the only one, right? Like most people, naturally, humans don't want to stick out for the most part, right? And, being of minorities in America, all day, every day, you stick out, and all day, every day, you don't have like these examples to model after. I think that's the biggest thing that people don't understand is like, I always use the example of the movie Boomerang with Eddie Murphy. You ever seen it?
I have.
Okay, so, I say this all the time, and when I say it, like people pause for a second and they think about it, they're like, that can't be right. And they try to argue, but like they can't think of another example. I always say this, growing up, the only example I saw of a person of color, and this was like a whole movie of people of color, in a corporate setting, was Boomerang. In my formative years, 0 to 18, I'm talking 1980 to 1998.
Right.
Everybody was depicted in some type of service role. So police officer, fireman, working as a line chef or a cook or something. Teacher, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Never in a corporate setting.
Right.
Like that was my beacon for, okay, corporate America's a thing. And when you look at corporate America, by and large, it's mostly Caucasians, right? Because what we see in the media, what we see in movies, what we see in TV,
Right.
we don't see minorities depicted in these roles.
That is so true. And I would say, not to, do the pain Olympics here, but, you think about it, and I've had this talk with people before growing up in my formative years when they, talk about famous Asians that we could look up to. And then, now we have Crazy Rich Asians, and it's now becoming more the mainstream. They're not just, impotent, geeky, nerdy, undesirables, non-sexy, whatever it is that were all negative connotations. I remember having a talk with, growing up with friends or classmates, just like, there must be some famous Asians. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, if you think about Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan, what are they famous for? This is, martial arts. And that's like that whole, it grew to be the stereotype. And that's the only way Asians could, gain some sort of fame in Hollywood, aside from the whole, like, victims or villagers or, fish out of water or whatever it is.
Yeah. And to your point, like the stereotypes are normally meek and kind of like, humble. They're not, I always say we need to see ourselves win. We need to see people like us win. So, whenever like, Serena Williams wins the championship, like the whole Black community is celebrating that, right? Because we just want to see images of someone that looks like us win instead of like in these negative situations of them losing, they're impoverished, they're in some type of struggle situation, life's kicking their tail. Like we'd like to see the opposite effect of, no, that's somebody that like makes no sense. They came from Compton. They're, one of the most decorated, if not the most decorated, female athletes of all time.
Yeah, I would say that there's whole forums where people have vents about like, according to Hollywood, I'm this Asian ethnicity and therefore I speak in broken English, or I'll be the one that you ask for directions, or like I'll be your, it's so, I don't know. It's like the whole constant reinforcement of this is what's cool, beautiful, to be attained and ideal, that it's a pressure kind of thing.
And so you hit on something that rings true to me as a parent. So I have a daughter that's 10 and I have a son that's 2. And, like my daughter we live in suburbia. It's mainly Caucasian. My daughter wants to straighten her hair all the time, right? Like, because that's the images of beauty that she sees represented across her schoolmates, but also in the media, right? Like, so these things all formulate into like, why can't I straighten my hair? Which is the act of doing that is counterintuitive to the way God made her, right? Like, things of that nature. She's already experienced a situation where like kids like, oh, you can't dress up as Elsa from Frozen because you're not white and blonde, right? Like, but this whole concept of like, someone recently brought up how Serena is built completely different than all of her peers in the sport, right? And I'm sure she's dealt with issues of the way that she views herself and beauty and things like that. To your point, it affects all of us, like as males in America, like average males. You look at standards of beauty, and without images to kind of bounce against, standards of success, standards of everything. To your point, personality-wise, like the whole media presents Black males as aggressive and thugs and this, that, and the third. And unpopular opinion, sometimes we help them with that by in the music and things that reflect, I hate to say, environments that we tend to be in.
Correct.
So there's that. There's again, it all ties to representation matters. Going back to my daughter, though, recently she came home and she said, hey, there's this girl at school. She's of mixed descent, meaning, Black and Caucasian. And she keeps making fun of me, saying I'm, dark and look burnt, blah, 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 blah. As I explained to her, that's colorism, right? Like that's a form of self-hate. It's a rejection of her African-American side, right? Like, and I said, unfortunately, you're in the environment where it reflects European standards, right? I said, you're not of European descent. And I said, that's counterintuitive to your natural beauty, right? Like it's kind of a mind F, right? I didn't say it in those terms to her, but it is. And my daughter's super smart. She hangs out with me far too much. And as a result, like we have very higher level conversations that a 10-year-old typically would have. But that being said, like going back to your travels, like, is colorism a thing overseas? Do you see like, we hear about caste system, like what are some of the parallels or things that differ compared to American society as you travel to, Okinawa, to Taiwan, etc., like these various different Asian communities.
Well, so yes, there is that. And to jump on your last point about that, it's a product of us growing up here where we're not the majority. And whether it's deliberate or not, the message is sent to us growing up in this environment, like, you're not the ideal, you're not the standard of beauty, you're not what's considered normal. It's, whether deliberate or not, and it kind of permeates us through to us every day of us growing up here. So it's definitely interesting to segue into that. When I do my travels and I see different countries, I've observed there is a quote unquote social ladder in each of those countries where the majority is at the top of that ladder.
Okay.
They're the ideal or the standard of beauty, and they have these benefits and they live that privileged, kind of all, they're the top level.
So help me understand that. So if I'm in Taiwan, everybody's Taiwanese. So what is the majority?
Taiwan, that's probably, I'll start with Korea. For example.
All right, let's do Korea.
Korea has such standards of beauty and this ideal of the pale skin, or, the ivory skin kind of beauty. And even in Taiwan, actually in most Asian countries, it's there.
Okay.
Japan, Korea, I think Taiwan.
So I'm assuming lighter equals better.
Lighter equals better.
All right.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. So, therefore, the Asians from the other countries that grow maybe darker, like the Filipinos, they would be lower on that ladder.
Okay.
And consequently, what I've noticed is in those countries, they'll get the lower paying jobs, the menial jobs, and in some cases, they're at the bottom of that ladder.
Okay.
So seeing that parallel what I grew up with here, that social ladder, it's really eye opening.
Yeah, though it's interesting, and I always think of it in situations with like Black culture is done through different ways of, for certain periods of time, it's been like very, very fair skinned. Individuals are like glorified,
yes,
from an entertainment standpoint, right? Like that's the beauty standards,
right?
From a marketing advertising standpoint, that's the beauty standards. And then we go back through cycles of like, no, now we like deep, dark, chocolatey, mahogany skin tones. You saw that a lot in recent history with like Black Panther coming out. Like there were no lighter skinned actors and actresses in that movie. It's very dark toned characters, right? And very natural hairstyles that would be reflective of Africa, right? Like, and so now I feel like we're back in that trend, and you even see in trends of in and out of African garb coming into American society, right? Like during the Black Panther era of that movie being super popular, like people were literally getting dressed up in African garb to go to the movies. I think the second release even had a theme of like wear white African garb because of sorry, what's his name?
Chad Boseman.
Chad Boseman. Yeah. Is that Chadwick Boseman?
Chadwick Boseman.
Okay. Because he had died in real life.
Right.
And, part of the movie had his funeral. So like people were literally coming out in droves of like white African garb to go to the movie. So we've definitely gone up and down on the whole like colorism thing, but colorism is totally a thing in our culture. It exists. It's always been strong. It dates all the way back to slavery. This concept of can you pass as white, right? Like especially post slavery of like could you essentially blend in, right? Like the theme of blending in to society and live a normal quote unquote life in America. My family is very heavy in historically Black colleges. Like a lot of my dad's side went to historically Black colleges. My mom's side, my mother went to a historically Black college. And the running joke between them for their generation was my mom's school, Fisk. You had to pass the paper bag test, meaning like they take your picture, you had to submit a picture with your application, and put it up next to a paper bag. And basically, like if you were darker than the paper bag, you didn't get in because Fisk was known to have beautiful women, meaning very fair-skinned women.
Wow.
And my mother is very fair-skinned.
Yeah.
Shockingly, I'm very dark. You've seen my brother. My brother's pretty dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
My dad's about my skin complexion. My mother is very fair-skinned. So that was a running joke between those two. Is like, you got the fist because you're fair-skinned, right? Like, but these standards of beauty exist. I hate to say it, they shape the way that we see ourselves, that we present ourselves, our self-esteem, right?
It's such a powerful force, and to me, it's hammered home by the fact that you see these, and this is not my culture, but in India, there was a story done on how they have this cream that you can put on to lighten your skin. They have that standard of beauty is like, lighter equals better, somehow more beautiful. It's absolutely the case in Asia, where they strive for that ivory skin or the pale skin. Some of it I'm told is like, well, it's a sign of you didn't have to work out in the sun and therefore came from a good family and didn't have to do manual labor. But there's all kinds of negative connotations assigned to that.
Right.
That darker skin. So yeah, it's so powerful, and throughout the world, it's happening in a lot of places other than America.
It is, and like even money can't erase it, right? Like very powerful individuals of color, you see go through these phases of lightening their skin. The most prominent one I can think of is Sammy Sosa. When's the last time you saw a picture of Sammy Sosa?
It's been a while.
Okay, I'll send you a picture after this recording.
Okay.
Sammy Sosa does not look like the Sammy Sosa hitting 50-plus home runs you remember. Wow. He looks like Mark McGwire at this point. Like he's bleached his skin.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah. And then even things of like, the kind of like permanent straightening of the hair through chemicals and things of that nature. Like, again, like the weight that we're describing that you live with as a minority in America. Like, again, money just gives you a opportunity to essentially like chase your wildest dreams of essentially hitting these European beauty standards, right?
Right.
And to your point, they exist everywhere. Like they impermeate other cultures that are not American, right? Because America's marketing ability worldwide, right? It's kind of influential. Our movies go elsewhere. I shouldn't say I never once. Very few movies are popular enough to like dent our infrastructure here in America, right? Like, I think in the movie Parasite recently, right? Like that won some awards and whatnot, but for the most part, that's the anomaly. Right. Movies coming into our infrastructure. It's Hollywood produces movies for the world.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, and I can say this for a fact, like when I was over in Korea for summer school, I went over a couple summers. There was one year, the very first Mission Impossible came out.
Okay.
Then after that, it was Independence Day. Mm-hmm. These were big event movies. You could tell the impact of Hollywood in these foreign markets. So yeah, it's probably the most recent example I can remember was I was in Taiwan when Top Gun Maverick came out.
Okay.
And boy, was it big in Taiwan. The crowd, and there's so many reasons for it. I don't know if it even made a splash here, but I believe, with the tension going on between Taiwan and China trying to basically claim Taiwan, and Taiwan kind of passively, peacefully, meekly saying, no, we're independent. It meant a lot to, some of the people there that Maverick wore the Taiwanese flag or his jacket.
I didn't know that. See?
I believe, if I remember correctly, for some advertising, and I don't know if, I got to catch up on it, but that was a big sticking point for China. That I think they wanted to digitally remove that flag.
Wow. Things you don't hear about. And again, this, I always bring this up, right? Like, people, by and large, in American society are in the homogenous situations, meaning like,
yes,
they live in communities of people that look and feel like them,
right?
Same social, economic, demographics, similar values, typically.
Right.
And so as a result, like we live in this digital age of social media algorithms. If that's your homogenous situation, your algorithms are very homogenous as well.
100%.
I caught zero wind of that. Like what you just brought up there. My world apparently is like, does it have enough Asian influence?
Right.
And sidebar, truth be told, my son is adopted, right? And we were registered foster parents for years. part of the adoption process is you kind of scrutinize your own network a little bit. Because if you're going to adopt a child, you have to give them a sense of identity. So if you're going to go outside your own race, do you have enough, just like we're saying, do you have enough people to give them a sense of identity in your immediate network? Well, they see enough examples where like they won't get lost in the mix from an identity standpoint, right? And you know, quite frankly, they like my wife and I, when we sat down to do the paperwork, we're open to everything. We can support that. We can give a child a sense of identity. When we really scrutinized it, we were like, man, we just don't have enough Asians that are, you know, in our network to give an Asian child a sense of identity. And we felt like that would be a disservice. And so that was a box that we unchecked. I think we might even unchecked Caucasian. Not that we don't have tons of Caucasian people in our network, but we didn't feel like we had enough sense of like giving them their own culture. You know, it was one of those things where like, and so we whittled down our list as we kind of went through it, but like we were very conscious of, I don't want to create a situation that I've lived through, you know, to another child, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about homogenous experience, and I know that you know, there are things, and this is then, you know, people try and spin it into like, oh, you're trying to divide us. Like, no, these are, you know, it's not like I every day I wake up and I want to remind the world I'm Asian. This stuff hits you when you least expect it.
It does.
I was out with my work colleagues, and they had picked, you know, they wanted to go to, you know, an Americanized Chinese restaurant. And we were just waiting for our table. And, you know, this white lady came up to me and was like, you know, there's 5 of us. Can we get a table? And I'm sitting there looking around like, you can do whatever you want. And then it hit me later, like, you know, she just made the natural assumption, like, I'm Asian, I must be working for that restaurant since I'm dressed business casual. You know, these things I don't know. I know that, you know, you kind of want to be a little careful tossing around white fragility, but I do believe it is true that these are the experiences that that we don't even choose to have, that hit us. That really sharply remind us of our differences. And, you know, like you said, there's the homogenous experience. I think these are things that the majority it never happens to them. They're not aware of it. I don't, you know, I don't think it's like an active ignorance or deliberately being obtuse. They are not aware of these kind of situations.
Yeah, and that's my take on it as well. Again, I've created an environment in my network of you can talk to me on the side, you can talk to me publicly about these things. And what I found is it's exactly like you said. A lot of my liberal friends are just like, they're kind of dumbfounded. They're like, hey, you know, on the side they're messing me, and they're like, you're telling me you walk out your front door and I walk out my front door every day and there's a different like reality for us? And I'm like, yeah, these are real things I've seen. You know, and I can rattle off like all my experiences over, you know, the years, 40+ years old. You know, I got lots of experiences to rattle off. And to your point, they're like dumbfounded that, you know, because again, they're in a homogenous situation. Like, how have I never heard of this? Why do I not know about these things? And they normally are very offended that they don't know about it. They normally like giving themselves a call to action. They're like, what do I do to, you know, how do I educate myself? How do I, you know, how do I make the world a better place? That's my more liberal friends. My more conservative friends are, you know, kind of take the approach of like, hey, we're all Americans. We just need to like fold into this American, like fall into the American, in their mind, what they consider America, right? Like, you love your land, you love your army. I'm just happy to be on this, you know, these rolling hills, this green land. You know, I'm proud to be American. American flags, and eagles, and you know, like it doesn't matter where we come from, we're all American. They kind of go to that approach of like, that's not a thing. We just need to come together as Americans, right? I've talked to
my brother about that. He calls it the reductive approach. It's oversimplified, and you know, it's crazy. You know, my liberal friends obviously are sometimes shocked when I relate to them. I'll give you kind of a reverse kind of story. But then for me, and this is my ignorance, when I talk to some of my black colleagues, men, they'll talk to me about like, you know, if I'm walking on the street, instinctively I can see like, you know, the women will cross to the other side of the street because I'm a black man. or they'll try to not take the same elevator up with me.
Yeah.
And he's like, as a black man, I am highly aware when this happens. And I had that same reaction. I was like, my God, I had no idea.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, you know, I didn't try to gloss over it and say, hey, get over it. We're all Americans.
Right.
You know, I don't think that's the right approach. You have to respect the differences and not be so fragile about it.
Yeah.
I would say second one, which is, you know, being sensitive or acknowledging the possibility. Here's an example: K-pop.
Okay. Korean pop, for those that don't know what that is.
Yeah, Korean pop. So you look at it, and I'm not big into it. I'm ashamed to say I'm Korean, but, you know, I'll listen to it. But one thing that came about is obviously they took a lot from the black artists. You know, the choreography,
Okay.
the lyric writing, the talent, you know, a lot. There's a lot of effort that came from black talented artists from that in the K-pop industry, underpaid them and did give them their due credit. And, you know, as a Korean, you hear that and you're like, wow, that's shameful. It can't, you know, obviously, you know, it's common, but shameful.
See, I thought they stole from boy bands like the NSYNCs of the world.
They did that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess you could argue that like the boy bands of the world were stealing from the temptations of yesteryear,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah. Right.
I don't know. So that might be an unpopular opinion point. Like, and again, I'm not like, so I don't do anything artistic, right? So let me just say that as a caveat.
Right.
So it's hard for me to understand what that line is of artistic stealing versus like iteration.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I'm not educated to speak on this subject. I'll just be honest.
Yeah, that'd be what? Inspiration versus imitation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true.
It's very tough for me to draw those lines because, again, I'm just not in those creative spaces enough to be able to say like that's clearly stealing versus like this is inspiration.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Let's not get into that.
Yeah.
I guess my whole thing was the whole, you know, being aware of the fact that, and being sensitive to other people's experiences, like learning about my black coworkers and what they went through was eye-opening. And, you know, I didn't take offense to it.
Yeah.
I didn't tell them, get over it. I didn't tell them, oh, we're all one America. I was like, wow, I need to be more aware of this.
And you take it as fact. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You take it as fact instead of like trying to counter argue it.
Right. Trying to dismiss or deny it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting is obviously black male, right?
Yeah.
You know, I take the approach of I'm crossing the street because I don't want no problems. I mean, if you know, if you're clutching your purse tight, or
Right.
even if you just have like prejudices, let's just avoid the situation altogether, right? And so I take the defensive approach of like, let me avoid all potential problems.
Right.
That'll mitigate half these up front.
Yeah.
It's a crappy way to live the life. I hate to say it, it is, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, it kind of goes back to like, we're talking about conservative networks and how they take this approach of like, we just need to like ignore that and full under the flag in America. And in my head, I'm always like, I wish it was that simple because I gladly take the easy out, right? Like, I'd love to not have to think so hard about just living life.
Right. And that's absolutely my feeling too. To the people that say like, oh, you want to make a federal case out of everything. Like, nah, I was really trying to get on with my day.
Right.
You know, it's, I know this happened a couple years ago. I was so mad about it. I posted on Facebook that I was leaving work and someone passing by on the street, you know, was riding in a car, basically yelled at me to go back to China.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's part of the reminder that you're this other.
Yep. You're like, I'm just walking down the street.
I
living
was
life.
leaving work.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
Exactly. Like just talking about it, you're kind of like, it's exhausting, right?
It is
I think that's the part people don't understand is how exhausting it is.
Yeah.
And how you wish it was so simple to just like ignore.
Right.
It's literally impossible to just ignore.
Right.
It's a fabric of how the world sees you, how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you operate day in, day out. You know, I've given examples in corporate settings of like, you know, somebody will blow their top one day, right? And quite frankly, they come back to work the next day and, you know, all is forgiven. I'm like, as a black male, I can't do that because there's already like a strike against me of the stereotype. So if I further that stereotype, nobody gives me the benefit of the doubt. It just plays into like, oh man, we shouldn't have hired them in the first place, right? Because they always blow up in this way, right? Like, There's statistics that support that Black women are viewed this way all the time, right? Like,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
media portrays this, right? Like,
I've actually heard that from some of my Black women coworkers, that they actually don't want to get that stamped with that angry Black woman kind of thing.
Yep.
So they really try and be meek and mind their P's and Q's.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is like, okay, so it's this balance between you try to blend in and not ruffle any feathers, but the reality is like people that get promoted in the workplace, people that get things done in life, typically are doing some type of like ruffling feathers or challenging status quo.
Right.
And so how do you marry up these two, right? Like how do you not play the stereotypes?
Right.
And your competition, your counterparts can do it all day long, right? Like they can cuss in meetings, they can stand up, they can bang their fist on the table, they can be irrational at times.
Right.
You somehow have to be like extra strategic to get the same results. That in and of itself is a weight, right?
It is. It requires a lot more effort, and you have to be way more mindful of it. And then sometimes, you have that question of, why is it when this guy does it, he's a leader and assertive and type A, and when this woman, the Black woman, does it, she's the angry Black woman, or a shrew, or whatever epithet you want to use. So it's definitely those things that it's not it's not as simple as some people make it out to be.
Yeah, and the outcomes are quite frankly maddening, right? Like one gets labeled as, to your point, a leader and promotable. The other one gets a glass ceiling put over their head.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about a lot here. Let's go ahead and kind of put some closure around it. So I always like end with a call to action of sorts. So if you were to put a call to action to people that are listening, and they're hearing some things for the first time, they have some new considerations, like what's the call to action to our network of people that again, this is the first of them, they're like, okay, I never considered these things.
That's a good question. Going back to my earlier example, for example, I know, you're Black, I'm Korean. Supposedly there's supposed to be strife between us.
We've never had it.
No, well, our racers. And, I read about something, like the K-pop, the mistreatment of Black talent. And I ask myself, what can I do to be a better ally? I think that, you can't, it was in the movie Contact, small moves, right?
Okay, I haven't seen the movie Contact.
Where it was just like baby steps. You can't make that, you become Jesus and save everybody. But, I think it starts from having this awareness, maybe not making things so overly simplified, kind of, I don't know, willing to have these conversations. It's hard to say. I guess we, as a group, this is where I'm coming from. We had this discussion at work where I feel like as a country, we're stuck on a basic problem we have to answer, a challenge.
Okay.
And, it might be something as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. And there's some people that say, it's 2.5. And the current culture is so like, well, we'll split the difference. The true answer must be, let's meet at the midway point. No, 2.25 is not the right answer to that question. Right. And that's not the right answer or the right way to solve this problem. But we as a country are stuck on problem one. And there's so many more to answer aside from that. I really feel like we have to transcend that somehow. We've got to reach people. We've got to have these discussions, and we may not see eye to eye, but there's so many metaphors I have for it. It's like we're in this house, all of us, and we can't leave it. Nobody's leaving this house.
It's true.
And we all have to figure out a way to live with each other. For the half of the country that are maybe trying to led by these extremists saying, well, it'd just be better if they left the country. Like, no, that's not a realistic solution.
Right.
But to continually try and live life as if that's how you're going to try and achieve your final solution, and this country's going to still be hurting. It's just so important that, it's got to start from somewhere. We've got to have these, break through and have people be a little more aware, and willing to have these tough conversations.
Mm-hmm. Kind of piggyback. So there's a belief out there that conversations are just the starting point. Conversations, there has to be something on top of that. Like marches don't create change. Conversations don't create change. I tend to be in the same ballpark as you. Like, at the bare minimum, be willing to have a conversation. I think a lot of people start with counter or rebuttal. And I think the ability to listen is something that's missing in this country right now. Just the ability to listen and understand that, as much as people like to identify as being open, have diverse networks, right? Like, most people are not, quite frankly. One of the things that really opened my eyes tremendously was in college, a roommate, or not, a teammate of mine on the hockey team was like, I'll be honest with you. He called me brother man. That was his nickname to me. He's like, I'll be honest with you, brother man. He's like, I grew up in Michigan, suburbia. Basically everybody I knew looked like me, felt like me. He's like, sure, we had a couple black people at school, but like maybe I got to know 2 of them over, all the years. He's like, basically my whole demographic looks and feels like me. He's like, and I was having these conversations back in college with my teammates and whatnot. He's like, I've never had conversations like this before. Like, and that's the thing is like, my call to action, shockingly, is two-sided, 2 ways. And I like to have a call to action to, if you come from one of those homogenous situations where you can't understand something you're seeing in the media and the way that people are responding to it, especially if it's minorities and you're not a minority, 1, be willing to listen. But 2, like, on the flip side of it, and this is an effort for us minorities, being willing to have the conversation, not get exhausted, right? Like, because there's a level of exhaustion that happens. But be willing to keep, like, if someone's really wanting to learn, be willing to educate them on things, give them resources, like come prepared with resources, tools, let them do some self-study. Like, don't exhaust yourself trying to prove something to them. Give them examples, because I think a lot of this comes back to, just like you mentioned about the Maverick movie, I didn't know that was happening, right? Like, so I think our, in America, our Caucasian friends who are the majority here, I think a lot of times they just never been exposed to these things. And versus like in our cultures as minorities, if they're relevant to our cultures, they are the top conversation at our dinner tables, quote unquote, right?
I would, so it's a tough question to answer for me. Obviously, this conversation, an example, or at least something that comes to mind, is this meme that said, you can't teach someone what they don't want to know. And, I know that we had this, it was in a professional setting where, for me, it's a trigger, like kind of cringe kind of trigger, where we were having a discussion on race, and they're like, well, I don't have a racist bone in my body. And I can see you have that reaction too. I hear that. I'm like, all right, so you can see this where the attitude we talk about, like, be willing to listen and be more aware, be open to it. And it's probably that whole like mentality of can't admit fault. I can't be wrong. I can't, it starts from there. For me, I would take the opposite approach of that, and not say like, I don't have a racist bone in my body. I know I may as well. I think I do. I pretty do. Right. I think we all do.
I think minorities are quicker to acknowledge that we all do have some level of prejudice.
I will say you have some hard-headed minorities that probably are just as bad or don't acknowledge. But yes, I would say for me personally, as a minority, that wouldn't be my first go-to. It's like, I don't have a racist bone in my body. My first go-to would be like, yeah, I can do better. It's to me humble and more open to start with that.
Yeah, I've always been a firm believer of, you have to recognize that these prejudices exist, whether it be like media driven, whether it be something your grandmother said once upon a time, like or some experience you had. These things all exist. In Black America, a lot of them tie back to slavery. They tie back to segregation, Jim Crow. Again, these were our grandparents, our parents, like they lived through civil rights. There's wounds, deep wounds that still exist in some of them. And you're crazy if you don't think that permeated to our generation.
Right.
Like these people are still alive. And people on both sides of that civil rights fight, right? Like they were in prominent decision maker decisions and legislation, positions.
Yeah.
These people influence today's society, and they exist. Like these concepts, these prejudices are everywhere in our society. They are.
I will say for me, this is more a close and personal situation. I wasn't looking for it. There's a good friend of mine. He moved to California, but he played in adult league here. Ethan Ferris.
Okay.
Good guy. And we first played against each other. I hated playing against him.
He's tough.
He's tough.
Yeah.
Persistent. Good forechecker. But then he played on my team. And, I wasn't looking for it, but, we were just came to hang out, happy hours. I was like, hey, Ethan, I'll give you a ride to hockey tonight, and just came where we were talking about stuff and I was open to it. And there was a lot I didn't know.
Yep.
And we, obviously late to get into it in this chat, but we're talking about 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah. Yep.
Just hearing that part of it. And I wanted to hear the stories.
Yeah. Isn't that something like, in Asian circles, are they talking about reparations at all? Or
No,
exactly.
Really, yeah.
But like internment camps probably are a conversation, right? Like again, like different conversations at the proverbial dinner tables based on cultural experiences and history.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, we're to your point, we're like segueing into like other conversations.
Absolutely.
I love that we did a quick call to action for the listeners. And Dave, I really appreciate you being on the podcast and kind of sharing your experiences. I thought this was a heck of a conversation that people could probably get a lot of value from, and hopefully take some of it and change the approach to conversations as they come up.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any, I always like to give the opportunity for any type of shout outs or handles or, socials or anything like that you'd like to put out into the atmosphere.
I'm not on Instagram, not really much on Twitter, but, just it's call out to the whole hockey community here for us being able to sit down and have this conversation. This is I think why hockey could be the great uniter. So we'll see.
Yeah. I love me some hockey, as everyone knows. All right. So that'll wrap up today's episode. Again, I'm Chuck Scott. This is the Dawn of Unpopular Opinions, where we'll continue to have these discussions, put things out on the forum. I have a very diverse network. I love having these conversations in my private life. I want to share them with a greater audience because I think they're valuable. I think they're my network is very educated, well-spoken, can articulate thoughts. I think it's better than the banter that normally happens on social networking forums of just people arguing in the comment section that don't know each other, don't have a stake in anything. They're just what I call keyboard warriors. To me, this is a much meaningful way to have these conversations. I hope that it sparks a new thought. I hope that, I start getting feedback and, conversations happen as a result on the side, and ultimately action. I like to see change in mindsets, change in society, change for the better. And I'd like to see a better world for future generations. So thanks for listening, and be sure to like and follow the Facebook page, the podcast, all the different social things that we do these days. Change your algorithms as a result. And I'll continue to set up these conversations and record more podcasts. So thank you much. And until the next time.